My name is Allison and I'm 20 years old. I'm a university student at the moment in a still unfamiliar city, so dating is something that has been very hard for me. I don't have many friends at my university as I'm not very outgoing, so the only way that I do meet potential partners is through Tinder. I remember the day that I first saw this man. I was swiping on Tinder between classes as I had about a 30-minute break. As I was swiping, a man's profile came up and instantly jumped out at me. His name was Owen, and he went to the same university as me and was a medical student. He looked handsome and his bio was funny. Within a few seconds, I had already swiped right. As time passed and the day went on, I had almost forgotten about the man. That wasn't until I was making my way back to my dorm room and I got a notification. I found out that we had actually matched. At this point, I was both excited and a bit surprised as I wasn't the most confident girl, and honestly, I thought that this guy was probably too good for me. We chatted back and forth for a few hours before ultimately deciding to go on a dinner date the following day. I spent the night planning my outfit and feeling finally ready to get into the dating scene, as I felt as though I spent my entire first year of college alone. The day finally rolled around and I remember feeling as though my classes would never end. When they eventually did though, I made my way back to my dorm to get ready and wait as Owen would be picking me up soon. After getting ready and getting a text from Owen that said I'm outside with a few heart emojis, I gathered my things and headed downstairs. That's when I saw him. He was standing outside of his car with a rose in hand, and though it was a bit cheesy, I remember feeling insanely lucky to be given this chance as Owen seemed like a great guy who obviously tried very hard. As I approached him, he reached his hand out and told me how beautiful I looked before opening the door to his car and helping me in. As he shut my door and made his way over towards the driver's side, I looked around the car and began to notice some red flags right away. First of all, the windows were extremely tinted, as far as I could tell, even darker than is legally allowed. There were tools in the back of his car which seemed extremely random, ranging from a hammer to what looked like a knife in the floor behind his seat. I began to have second thoughts and even thought about getting out, but that's when I noticed something else. The handle on the passenger side door looked as though it had been broken. I went to lightly pull on it, but that's when Owen got into the car. He told me that the handle had been broken since he got the car from his dad a few years ago. At this point, I tried to tell myself that these were all just odd coincidences and that I shouldn't let irrational fears stop me from putting myself out there. As we drove off towards our destination, he chatted with me, and I'll be honest, the sound of his voice and the charming manner in which he spoke made me forget all about the worries that I had. That wasn't until I noticed that we had been driving for longer than we should have been. We were so deep in conversation that I hadn't even noticed that we had been driving for over 45 minutes, so long that it had begun to get dark. I asked Owen where it was we were going and that the restaurant was back in town. He then told me that he had a new place in mind that had just opened up in the next town over. I remember at this point getting a distinct sinking feeling in my stomach as I knew something was up. Even the tone of Owen's voice as he had answered was strange. At this point, I asked Owen if we could stop somewhere so that I could use the bathroom. To this, he simply said no and that there would be a bathroom at the restaurant. At this point, I'd like to say that I valiantly fought him off or that I made an epic escape from the car, but none of that happened. We drove and drove for at least 30 more minutes to the point where it was now dark outside. He had stopped conversing with me and instead was now simply focused on the road. It's as if he was in a trance or something. Then I heard something. The ding of the dashboard could be heard, notifying us that the car was low on gas. And guess it's your lucky day, I remember him saying as we took an exit towards a gas station and I finally began to gain some hope. I remember upon seeing the neon lights at the gas station feeling a sense of elation but also fear. I didn't know what Owen was capable of or if he had a gun or not. I had to make sure that whatever I did to escape, I did it fast. As we pulled up to the gas station, I remember him telling me to wait and that he would walk into the gas station with me, but first he had to fill up his tank. I waited and looked around, seeing cars coming and going from the gas station. This sense of being imprisoned while everyone around me went on about their day without noticing still fills me with fear thinking about it. Once he had finished, he got back into the car and parked it into a spot before opening the door and letting me out. We made our way to the gas station, and upon entering it, I looked around, taking notice of the layout of the store. I then made my way towards the bathroom, shut myself in, and locked it. I sat there for a good 5 minutes trying to brace myself for what I was about to do. That's when I heard a knock on the door, and Owen sternly told me to come on and that it's time to go. This is when I thought to myself, it's now or never. I remember quickly pushing through the door before running towards the counter. I ran through the door which led back there and ran behind the cashier yelling for help, telling the man that Owen was crazy. That's when Owen ran out of the store, into his car, and drove off, all within a matter of seconds. I sat on the floor of the store behind the counter as I waited for the police to arrive. They would end up escorting me home that night, and I'm extremely thankful. I have no clue where Owen is or what happened to him, but I hope that wherever he is, he's far removed from society, as people like him are the personification of true evil. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've been single most of my life. I've never been the most socially adept or outgoing person there is, and so I've never really gotten the chance to experience a real relationship. Because of this, I decided to try Tinder. I know most would say it's among the worst places to try and find love, but at this point I was desperate. I remember using Tinder almost every day for weeks without any luck. And when I say without any luck, I mean it. I had not gotten a single match in the entire 2 weeks that I had been on. To make things worse, I swiped right on just about every person I passed, even those profiles that had one picture and a lackluster bio. This continued for a few more days until I finally got my first match. It was a younger woman by the name of Veronica. This girl was gorgeous. According to her bio, she was 24 years old and was working as a bartender in the city. I loved her profile and the vibes that she gave off. I ended up messaging her and we surprisingly hit it off. We even arranged to meet up for coffee in a few days when I was off work. Over the course of those few days in between us meeting online and us meeting in person, I would get to know Veronica, her hopes, her dreams, and even things about her family life. I couldn't wait to meet her, and so when the day did come, I remember arriving outside of the coffee shop 15 minutes before we were set to meet so that I could make sure and have a nice spot ready. I made my way inside and claimed a nice seat that bordered the window so that I could see Veronica when she pulled up. As the minutes passed, I began to worry that Veronica wouldn't come. It was already 5 minutes past when we planned to meet, and I decided that if she didn't arrive within the next 10 minutes, I would just leave and assume she just stood me up. More minutes went by, and in the end I felt bummed out and began to stand up just as I saw her car pull up and park just beside mine. Springing out of the car and running towards the building with a slight jog was Veronica. She entered and looked around the building before spotting me and rushing towards me. I remember her apologizing for being so late and telling me about the traffic. I simply told her that I was happy she was here in the first place and that it was no problem. She was just as great as she was online. We sat there talking for at least 30 minutes before she offered me to go back to her place to check out some of her games she had, as that was one of the main things we were discussing. I have to admit at this point I was a little bit nervous, and even as I said yes and made my way towards my car, I wondered about how this would all go down. As I was following her, I noticed that her driving was sort of rushed. We were going well over the speed limit on any street we found ourselves on, and she barely stopped at stop signs. That's when I noticed the fact that we were heading deeper and deeper into the country. The houses were becoming further and further apart, and the woods were becoming denser. About 15 minutes later, we arrived at what I assumed was her place. It was a small gray house positioned in a small clearing in the middle of a forest. I followed her along her gravel driveway and parked just behind her. Upon exiting the car, I looked around the scene, and that's when I noticed something. I could just make out the silhouette of a man in one of the front windows of the house. As I looked at the silhouette for a second, I noticed that it slowly backed away from the window as if trying not to be seen. At this point, I walked towards Veronica and began to tell her that I was actually going to head back home as I had forgotten to feed my dogs. She responded with pleas, asking me to stay and to at least see the house. I won't lie, at this point I was sure something nefarious was going on, as she kept insisting that I just go in the house for at least a minute. Something that wouldn't make any difference had something more not been planned. It was here when things went wrong, though. I told her pretty sternly that I wasn't going to go in and that I had to go. Nearly as soon as I said this, she balled her fist up and let out an awful scream. I backed away from her as soon as this happened. I then heard the sound of the front door to the house open and turned around to see a man in a mask running out of the house towards me. I ran towards my car before getting in, locking the doors and backing away. The man was still rushing towards my car as I was backing out of the driveway. Thankfully, I was close enough to my car to get in and out in time. As I was driving away, I remember calling the cops to tell them about the house and what had happened. I genuinely don't know what was planned had I gone into that house. I hoped that I was just going to get robbed, but something about the situation makes me think it could have been worse. Be careful with these dating apps, as even though they have worked on adding in verifications, you still never truly know who it is you're talking to. My name is Leo and I'm 19 years old. I was never really into dating apps, and honestly the only reason I ever tried one was because my friends told me about how easy it was to meet people on them. After using them for a few months, I realized that it was really easy to meet people on apps like Tinder. The only issue was that it was pretty hard to meet people who wanted anything long term. That's why when I matched with this girl, we can call her H, I was surprised to find that not only did we have a lot in common, but we were both looking for something real and long term. Because of this, we quickly set out a day for us to go on our first date. We were planning on seeing the Christmas lights that my city hung before going out to dinner together. It was a simple plan for a date, but I was excited nonetheless, as H seemed really special from what I had gathered from our chats. Because my car at the time was in the shop being worked on, she offered to take us in her car, something that I was grateful for, but also a little bit embarrassed. Don't get me wrong, I'm not ultra traditional or anything, but I had always imagined going on first dates with me being the one picking up my partner. That being said, when the night finally came around, I was ready to go see the lights, and I was super excited when I saw the gray Nissan that I knew H drove pull around. I remember trying to look into the car to make sure it was H, as it pulled up an oddly far distance up the road, but the tint was extremely dark, and without daylight, I couldn't see inside. That's when she confirmed it was hers, so I shut my front door and set off towards her car. I unknowingly forgot to lock my door, and this would end up being something that probably saved my life. As I approached the car, I began to get an uneasy feeling as she hadn't gotten out of the car or anything. I walked up to the passenger door, opened it, and said hey to H, only I noticed she wasn't looking at me. Rather, she was looking down at the floorboards as if purposely ignoring me. That's when I saw two men in the back seat of the car dressed from head to toe in black. I stumbled backwards and began to run away as I heard the men open the car doors and begin to chase after me. I made it to my door, and before I could even think, I was already inside and locking the door. I looked through the peephole to see the two men just make it to the door. They stood there for a second before walking off, getting in the car and driving away. I slumped down on the floor speechless. I had no clue what just happened. I opened my phone to see a single message from H that read, "Sorry." I blocked her and filed a police report on the incident the next day. Thinking back on the situation, I realize now how many red flags I ignored. I also realized how lucky it was that my door was left unlocked, as if I had to take the time to unlock it, I know those men may have caught up to me.